They are guides, all guides, and in unexpected places you'll meet their friendly faces, and a ready hand besides. There's not much danger of finding you're a stranger, for commissioner or ranger they are guides, all guides.
Hi, and welcome to Guides, the unofficial guiding podcast where we talk about everything guiding. I'm Taryn.
And I'm Marissa. Tonight we're stopping in on our southern neighbors for an all-American Girl Scout episode. We'll start off by learning all about the history of the USGS movement and their current operations.
Then we'll hear about the life and legacy behind their founder, Juliette Gordon Low. She was quite an interesting lady and one who is ahead of her time in many ways that we cannot wait to share with you.
And to round off the night, we'll be singing a US Girl Scout favorite, which is G for Generosity. Apparently, this is a campfire song that every Girl Scout should know.
But before we get to all of that, we want to let you know that this episode will likely be split into two parts. While doing our research, we found so much information that it definitely isn't everything, but we tried our best to pull information from as many different sources as possible.
And if we miss something or you don't hear about a particular fad or facet of knowledge, it's just because there was so much that we had to choose what we thought was the best and most relevant. And because there was so much for us to cover, we will split it into two episodes, as we said. The first one being the history of the Girl Scouts of the United States, which is this week's. And then we'll go on to learning about Juliette Gordon Low and G for Generosity next week.
Yeah. I was flabbergasted with how much information there was. Definitely more than what we found for even doing the research for Canada, and more than you found for, I'm assuming, what you found for Australia.
Yeah, I think so. I think probably the biggest reason is because the US there's so much more in terms of knowledge available and also knowledge online. So people there's so many more resources. And I think also the number of people in the United States who have this knowledge and all that, like, it just gets shared so much more.
Yeah, that's definitely what it felt like. So starting with the history, or the early history of the Girl Scouts, the first meeting in the U.S. was held on March 12th, 1912 in Savannah, Georgia, Juliette Gordon Low's hometown. And she had 18 girls show up. And they did, all the typical things that we think early Girl Scouts did. They camped, they hiked, they cooked, all that fun stuff. And fairly quickly, Low wanted to continue expanding the program and wanted to merge with the already existing Campfire Girls, which was a similar program. But since the Campfire Girls was a much larger organization, they weren't interested in combining with the Girl Scouts. Next, she went to go meet with the Girl Scouts of America, an earlier, smaller version of the Girl Scouts we know of today. And the Girl Scouts of America was founded in Iowa by Clara Lester Lane, who felt that Low had copied her organization and was luring away members from GSA and threatened a lawsuit. But Lester Lane didn't have the same social connections that Low did, and Girl Guides of America died out without the two groups merging.
Wow. I did not even know there was like a predecessor to, I thought it was all the same. That's so interesting.
Yeah. What got me was that she felt like the organizations were competing and saying they were both Girl Scouts.
Yeah.
And the little of information I could find about Girl Scouts of America is that it was based off of Baden-Powell's program. So I don't know what the fighting was about, but there was some, and Girl Scouts of America disappeared. Juliette Low changed the name from the Girl Guides of America to the Girl Scouts of the United States and moved their headquarters from Savannah to DC in 1913. And then they moved the national headquarters once again just 2 years later in 1915, and this time to New York City, where I believe it still is today the latest date I could find of New York was in the 90s, but I didn't see anything else past that, so I'm assuming they're still there. The first badge that they made in the Girl Scouts was an aviation badge in 1916, which is pretty cool in a number of ways. They were figuring out badges in STEM fields way before it was cool. And they were coming up with badges and expanding their program 4 years before women could vote in the States. So definitely hit the ground running with wanting to push those boundaries and not let gender stop anybody. The next big milestone was the first cookies were sold by a troop in Oklahoma in 1917. And that troop set up a more traditional bake sales, though, more like a table and you bought cookies from the table, than the more modern commercial sales that started in 1935, which, if I remember correctly, 1917 is way before that Winnipeg unit started selling cookies in Canada, eh?
Yeah, like ours did not start as a bake sale in that sense. Like it started literally as selling cookies door to door. So it's not, I actually can't remember if it was an idea that we got from the Girl Scouts or how that worked. We had our own recipe. That's all I'll say.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Ours had a different beginning, slightly.
Definitely. And from 1912, when they started, the organization grew quite quickly from that original 18 members. And by 1920, 8 short years later, there was over 70,000 members. And 3 years after that, in 1923, there was over 125,000 members in every state of America, as well as Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. Alaska and Hawaii not being states until later. Yeah, so definitely grew quickly and like spread across the country in only 11 years. And that was before like the internet, where I'm sure growing movements nationally was a lot harder than it is today.
Yeah.
In the 30s, during the Great Depression, the Girl Scouts helped and did their part by doing food drives and cooking and helping gather food for people in need. They also printed Who Are the Girl Scouts, a promotional booklet in Yiddish, Italian, and Polish to reach out to underserved immigrant communities in different parts of the country.
Very cool.
Yeah, so being on it, I thought it was strange that they picked those 3 languages. But I guess that's what the
I think
groups were at that time. The immigrant groups at that time.
Yeah, I was gonna. Yeah. I think overall, like the U.S. has a very there's a ton of different immigrants and cultures now, but I think at that time specifically, like Jewish and Polish, like there were a lot of Jewish Poles, and then like everyone was sort of, I guess at that time they would have been trying to leave Europe or seek safety, but also like the U.S. has a really, especially in like New York, strong Jewish and Italian. I think they were all headed to New York. They must have, but they have that strong foundation there.
Yeah, and just being like that proactive and creative to reach out to them in their first languages, making them feel a little bit more welcome.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on from the 30s into the 40s with World War II raging, they switched up what their efforts were. And like what we talked about in the Canadian Girl Guides, they helped support the war effort at home and operated as bike couriers, ran farm aid projects, collected fat and scrap metal, and grew victory gardens. They also, like Canadian British Girl Guides at the time, taught survival schools or survival skills to women and children who were struggling with all the turmoil that happened during the war. Another thing that I found really interesting is that they had Girl Scouts in the Japanese internment camps that were all over Canada and the US at the time, where people were concerned about Japanese Americans and Canadians being spies. So they basically locked them up in glorified camps and had all their property sold. But in these American internment camps, they had Girl Scouts that were in most of the camps, and these girls even participated in the Crystal City internment camp in Crystal City, Texas, so a national camp for Girl Scouts who were in internment camps. What I couldn't find...
That's really odd.
Yeah. What I couldn't find is, were these camps started by the girls and women who were interned against their will, or were they forced to participate to help colonize them? Yeah, which what we'll talk about in a future episode is how Girl Guides were used in residential camps in Canada. I wonder if it's a similar...
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. But there's so much information, I didn't have enough time to really dive into that question.
Yeah, because it's, I forget what episode it was, but we did talk about how Girl Scouts, I think twice we've talked about it, how they've emerged in like internment camps or like wherever during war when they weren't supposed to, like when they were captured by the enemy, or so to speak. But those typically happened by the women and girls in there, and were just allowed by whoever was holding them prisoner. So that's, I would be very intrigued to know how that started.
They received a congressional charter on March 16th, 1950. And then later on in the 50s, they assembled kits for Korea, which were pouches or bags of items needed by Korean citizens affected by the Korean War. And at the same time, like most of the United States, Girl Scouts started desegregating in the 50s. But leading up to that, there was quite a history of Girl Scouts forming troops for minority groups. So the first African American troop was founded quite early in the Girl Scout history in 1917. The first African American troops were formed in New York State in 1921. And the first Mexican American troop was formed in Texas in 1922. And then they got some high praise from both Ebony and Martin Luther King Jr. in the 50s. Ebony magazine saying in 1952 that Scouts were making slow and steady progress towards surmounting the racial barriers of the South. And then Martin Luther King described the Girl Scouts as a force for desegregation a couple of years later in 1956. So some pretty mighty work. Wow. Yeah. And definitely something today. Like, I noticed today there's a lot of, it's a place where girls can meet people that they wouldn't necessarily meet, at school or in other groups. It's a little more diverse than a lot of other programs I find. And you get to spend a lot of time and like learn a lot more about each other than you would in a program set up by your city that runs for, a couple months at a time.
I think sports is also, like, sports groups is a good example of that, especially for things like, say, up here in Canada, hockey is known to be a really expensive sport. So therefore only like fairly wealthy families can afford it. And therefore it just happens to be this way. A certain segment of the population are known, to participate in that sport. So therefore it's getting better, but you typically hockey is like rich white families is all I can say. Like, that's why there's not a lot of race diversity in that sport, for example. There are many other examples. You see it more, of course, though, in the cheaper sports, like, say, soccer, where, like, you don't have to buy all this equipment. It's, I think, a little bit better in terms of diversity. It's just very interesting. Take a look at Team Canada's soccer team versus Team Canada's hockey team. The diversity in race is completely different, and it's crazy surprising, but it sort of makes sense based on wealth, which is sad. But
it's a lot cheaper and easier to buy a pair of shoes than it is to buy hockey equipment.
Yeah.
And especially with guiding, even like the access, the uniform is a t-shirt. It's pretty easy. In the States, it's even less than just a t-shirt. So pretty easy for people of all economic backgrounds to join and participate.
Yeah. And there's programs too that are sort of built in place to make it easier. We have the try now, join later. You can also apply for subsidies if, like, your financial situation isn't great. So yeah, it's like meant to help all girls to be included.
Definitely. The National Girl Scout Program Center was established at the Gordon family home in Savannah, Georgia in 1956 as a space for programs to be run and developed. In 1969, a national initiative called Action 70 was created to help eliminate prejudices, both in guiding or in scouting and in the girls' broader communities. Which corresponded, I'm not sure if it directly corresponded, but
alert from Google Chrome. Upwards.
Sorry. Which led quite nicely into the next year, or the next decade in the 70s, where the Girl Scouts elected their first African-American National Board president, and then continuing on with various acts of service, helping Vietnamese refugee children adapt to their new lives in America. And then the last little bit of history that I have is that President Obama awarded Juliette Low a posthumous honor of the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2012, which is the highest honor, highest civilian honor in America, to mark 100 years of Girl Scouts of America. I'm not sure if we mentioned that a couple weeks ago in our centenary episode, but definitely worth mentioning again. And then the branches, which I know, being online and being a member of various guiding and scouting communities, I've been so confused by the American branches. With reason, because it is a little bit confusing. So in 1912,
I feel like just any other... Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Finish your thought.
I was going to say, I feel like any other organization other than your own, it just, like, is very confusing because the age is so different, like, even just a couple years, and you're like, oh, like, so... Quick example is guides in the UK go from, I think, 10 to 14, whereas we definitely split that between guides and pathfinders. So it's like a totally different age group and segment.
So the branches, like most guiding organizations in the early days, were originally between 10 and 18, but they quickly changed that to match the program and development of the girls, and going with how guiding wanted to continue, or how Little Sisters joined, and the guides didn't want to hang out with their little sisters. So they quickly adapted a brownie program based off of the same program in England in 1914 that was officially recognized in the mid-20s. And then at the same time they officially recognized brownies, they also officially recognized senior scouts, which is for girls over the age of 16. So the Canadian version of the early senior branches. And then in 1938, they played with the ages again a little bit to make brownies from age 7 to 9. They changed the name of the guides or scouts in the middle to intermediates, who are ages 10 to 13. And then seniors, they changed the ages a little bit again. And seniors became girls aged between 12 and 18. And that's what the age breakdown was until 1965, when the branches were changed again, creating more branches and dividing up those ages a little bit more. So in 65, the age groups were brownies from age 7 to 8, juniors age 9 to 11, cadets age 11 to 14, and then seniors again 14 to 18. So starting to look more like what we're used to today. Around the world, kind of the same number of branches and the same age breakdowns. That's pretty common through at least more Western guiding groups or guiding countries. And then in the early 70s, brownies changed again. And this time, they changed to allow girls to join when they were 6 or in grade 1, kind of starting at the beginning of elementary school too, because it's weird starting a program partway through elementary school in grade 2. Seems like a weird start for a program. And then also in the 70s, they started Pixies, which was a long-term pilot program for daisies, which was introduced nationally in 1984, who are little girls aged 5 and 6. And then Studio 2B, which took me a while to understand, was created in 2003 for girls aged 11 to 17, so for cadets and seniors, and it allowed girls to also work on their silver and gold awards as well as traditional badges, alongside booklets that focus on different topics. And some examples given were STEM and environmentalism. So it seems like it's a little bit more self-driven study, as well as a little bit more a broader range of topics that can be covered instead of the typical badges that you work on. And then the final change...
The name choice is interesting. It sounds like a movie studio.
Yeah. It was hard to understand and I couldn't really figure out where it fit in. So if someone wants to write in and let us know, that would be appreciated. Because at first I thought it was similar to Girl Guides of Canada Treks, which is more like girls focus more on camping and outdoors. But this didn't seem like that either, so I'm not quite sure. And the last major change to the branches came not that long ago in 2008, where some big changes were made. Not big changes. They changed so the branches were divvied up by grades instead of ages, to make it a little bit easier and girls weren't switching units during the school year. And then they created a ambassadors age group. So as of right now, it works out to daisies are girls in kindergarten, brownies are girls 1 to 3, juniors are girls in grades 4 and 5, cadets are grades 6 to 8, seniors are grades 9 and 10, and then ambassadors are grades 11 and 12. And like many programs, they have a loan program, which is called Juliette's, although that term was phased out nationally to go with the term Independent Girl Scouts. Most councils still use the term Juliette's, at least internally. And then the next thing that really confused me with the Girl Scouts, especially coming from Canada, where we have everything just divided up by provinces, is that their national or their organizational structure. So they also have national headquarters, which is headed by a CEO and a 40-member board of directors. And from there, they've divvied up the country into 112 councils that cover either large parts of states or geographical areas. And they've determined that the optimal size for a council is 10,000 girls, to kind of keep things organized and kind of keep things moving. And then the councils are then subdivided into either neighborhoods, service units, or associations, depending on the individual council. And then your individual troop or your individual unit. So I guess councils are their version of our provincial districts or provincial areas. And then their subdivided neighborhoods or associations would either be districts or communities, depending on which province you're in. So I'm like, when I, can start finding stuff on various council websites, I now have an idea of what all that means.
Yeah. It's interesting because I like the way that they've divided it based on number of girls in said council, because I think that better distributes resources. I think they would have the same problem as we do, though I imagine, I think the reason we're in provinces is because of provincial laws and provincial regulations and whatnot.
Probably.
But they would have the same problem because they're also divided into states, and states have different powers than like national. So I'd imagine, even though they're doing it regionally like that and by numbers, they would probably encounter the same problems we would if we attempted that. But they must make it work somehow, and it seems to work all right.
Yeah, and it might be like just geographical differences in states, because like I know in Ontario, like geographically, the difference between Southern Ontario and Northern Ontario is not insignificant, and the needs of Northern Ontario is dramatically different than the needs of Southern Ontario. And that's the same for all the provinces. The interior BC is very different than the coast.
And East Coast even to West Coast too is quite different. Like East Coast is not as vastly populated as the West Coast is, and it's just the population's not even.
Definitely not. Like every guiding or scouting organization nationwide, they have their promise, which can be made officially in Spanish, English, or sign language, which I thought was cool, being able to make it in sign language. And their promise is along the same lines as ours, a little bit different. It's on my honor, I will try to serve my God and my country, to help people at all times, and to live by the Girl Scout law. Excuse me. And you can substitute God for another word that is consistent with your personal beliefs. So it could be faith, creed, Allah, pretty much anything. They weren't putting any they weren't putting a limit to whatever options you can put, as long as it's kind of that higher meaning, higher, like, something to hold you accountable. Their law, which, again, very similar to ours in Canada, is I will do my best to be honest and fair, friendly and helpful, considerate and caring, courageous and strong, and be responsible for what I say and do, and to respect myself and others, respect authority, use resources wisely, to make the world a better place, to make the world a better place, and to be a sister to every Girl Scout. They also have a motto of be prepared. What I found interesting was they also have a slogan, which is do a good turn daily, which is, I'm pretty sure, the motto for brownies in Canada. I could be wrong.
Yeah. I think it's something like that. I'm trying to remember. Lend a hand, I think, is like the big thing, but it might have changed over the years.
Something along those lines. But I found it interesting that they had a slogan that covered all ages, versus other places not. And then the uniform is very different than Canada's, but I think more along the lines of the uniforms in other countries. So the uniform is a choice of either a tunic, vest, or sash for displaying the official pins and awards that girls receive. Underneath the tunic, shirt, or vest is a solid weight shirt and khaki pants or skirts that you can get anywhere. So they don't have to be, like, it's not an official shirt or anything, just a plain white shirt. And then once in high school, there's an optional scarf that they can wear as well. And then the colors of the different ages, which I've also have yet to be, until now, figure out what any of these colors mean when I see Girl Scouts.
Yeah.
Is daisies wear blue, brownies wear brown, juniors wear green, and then cadets, seniors, and ambassadors all wear khaki. So kind of losing your distinction between groups as they get older, but it gives girls the option, if they don't have a lot of badges, they can keep the same vest or sash all the way through. If they are badge hounds or hoarders, they have the option of buying vests and sashes as needed.
Yeah, I think it also probably accommodates like growth spurts. So like growing up in the younger years, you're going to change sizes quite frequently. Whereas when you get a bit older, although you can still definitely hit growth spurts in high school, like it's just like you tend to have most of your size like figured out, at least in this chest area. Like,
yeah.
And you can, like you said, just buy another one if needed. But I can see why that's the way it is.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And that's more along the, same uniforms, more along the lines of how Canada does it now, where it's one shirt from Sparks all the way to Leaders, and you just buy new shirts as you grow.
Mm-hmm.
They have all the same traditions as we do in Canada, except they also have Founders Day, which celebrates Juliette Low's birthday on October 31st. And it seems like what they do for Founders Day is add birthday cakes to their Halloween parties. Which makes sense. But they dress up, they do their typical Halloween-y type event, and then also enjoy some cake. And then badges and other awards. So they have skill badges, which are like the guide and brownie interest badges, I believe. I couldn't find a ton of information on skill badges, but that's what it kind of led me to understand. And then the Journey Awards, which is a series of lessons on a particular topic. And Journey Awards are made of multiple parts, and all parts must be completed before you can earn the journey, which is kind of similar to how our program is with the program areas. You need to complete so many activities in a theme, and you have to commit so many themes to get your program area. If you complete 3 journeys at one level, you earn a summit pin commemorating the work you've done. And before you can start your bronze, silver, or gold award projects, you need to complete at least one journey in your age category. So their awards are similar to the Baden Powell Award, Kid Accord, and Trailblazers Award in Canada, with significantly less influence or significantly less attention paid to program. So each project is a project that has to benefit either your local community or scouting, and has a not insignificant time allotted to the group or to the project. So the Bronze Award is for girls at the junior level. And the Bronze Award is done as a team effort of 2 to 4 girls. And each girl is expected to contribute a total of 20 hours to the project. And adults are allowed to be on hand to assist and guide the girls completing their project. The Silver Award is individual or small group, so pairs or groups of 3. Each group or each girl must contribute 50 hours, and Silver Awards must be girl-led, but adults can be on hand to advise and assist as necessary. And then the Gold Award is for girls in senior or ambassador. It's the highest award in Girl Scouts, and only 5.4 of eligible Girl Scouts successfully earned the award. So it's a pretty high standard and pretty impressive when you do complete it. To be eligible to even start your Gold Award, you need to complete either 2 journeys in senior or ambassador, or complete 1 journey and have your Silver Award. So you have to show that you're dedicated to guiding and have that time management skill before you can even start. And the Gold Award is a service project that reaches beyond the Girl Scout community and provides lasting benefit to girls in the larger area, in the larger community. The Gold Award is a minimum of 80 hours of work in planning and completing the project. And it's an individual award, but girls are encouraged to use troop members to help, although the time that their troop members put in isn't counted towards that 80 hours of work. If you complete your Gold Award and decide to enlist in the armed forces, you may receive an advanced rank once you enlist, and some post-secondary schools offer scholarships to recipients, which makes sense. It seems like it's a lot of work. I'm not sure if I would have been able to juggle and plan and figure all that out when I was in high school. 80 hours of work and planning and completing a project is a lot of time.
Yeah, it's completely focused on like what you would call a service project, but I feel like time spent is probably equivalent to getting your Trailblazers. Like you still have to earn all that program, and that program takes a lot of work, and do a service project that's, I think, 20 hours, I believe.
Yeah, but I felt like I did a lot.
I think
Sorry, continue.
I was going to say time-wise it seems the same, but it's a totally different basis of like what you're doing your work on.
Yeah, I remember doing like just being able to complete a lot of my program work for my chief commissioner, what's now the Trailblazers, in meetings and at camp and stuff. Like it was a lot of like things we're already doing. We're going to focus on what girls need to do to complete their Trailblazer, versus going out and doing an 80-hour service project.
I wonder if like they have to attend all their meetings on top of this, or if it's like maybe a little more relaxed and they don't meet as often. Like I'm very curious to know like how much time goes into that in terms of like meetings and their project, their gold award.
Yeah,
I should say.
I wonder how much of that's on the individual girl kind of figuring out what works best for her.
Yeah.
And then like any youth organization, there's always some scandals to go around. And the ones I found on Girl Scouts were pretty tame compared to a lot of what we hear about with children organizations. Being in the United States, they were focused on sexuality and gender. So they have a national policy of don't ask, don't evangelize about sex and gender. However, in October 2011, Girl Scouts of Colorado publicly stated, if a child identifies as a girl and the child family presents her as a girl, Girl Scouts of Colorado welcomes her as a Girl Scout. Saying this when they welcomed the first publicly transgender Girl Scout into one of their units. And then a couple years later, in July 2015, the Girl Scouts of Western Washington returned a $100,000 donation after their donors stipulated that the money couldn't be used to support services for transgender scouts. The council started a crowdfunding fundraiser to make up for the lost donation and raised $250,000, which more than made up for that original donation. So while they, officially might say, weren't really saying anything, their actions, at least in these two councils, shine a very different light on what they are opening their arms to. And that brings me to the end of their history and background and everything. It was a lot, but I'm sure I missed stuff. Like, I know I missed stuff, but it was interesting to dive deep into the organization that, as Canadian Girl Guides, we are so commonly misattributed to. I know whenever I say I'm a Girl Guide, probably like a quarter of the time, they're like, oh, like Girl Scout?
Yeah.
I
think it's an issue that you get if you go to areas where there's Girl Scouts, or where girls, Girl Guides or Girl Scouts is combined with Boy Scouts. So like, for instance, when we went to the Netherlands, Guides and Scouts are one, like Scouts is just seen as completely like equal in gender, in terms of their numbers. So, and same with like Iceland. So they think they just call it Scouts because that's what they're used to. And also I think when you come from North America, they just assume like it's all the same. I think, I don't know. I've never asked them what they assume, but that's generally, I think, why. But I wonder if you went to a country where, like in the UK, they call us Girl Guides, right? Like when we're talking back and forth between Canada and the UK. So I think it really depends on who you're talking to. If they're Scout based, like that is their name, then they'll probably call you a Girl Scout. But if they're guiding based, they'll probably call you a Girl Guide.
Yeah.
It totally depends.
I find it even with like members of the public, like if you're out selling cookies or something,
Yeah.
People just
Yeah.
aren't familiar that WAGS is a international organization. You hear a
Yeah.
lot about Girl Scouts in media, especially because so much of our media in Canada is just American media sent over the border.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think too, I'll just quickly add is that I think Girl Scouts is unique and like sort of separate from Girl Guides like that way because of the founding is different. And so that can be also another big thing that, I mean, I think people just assume, again, like you said, like, oh, you're all the same. And I think also in the US, they're just like so single-minded, not everyone, but a lot of people are, that they don't realize that, yeah, WAGS is huge and that it's much more far-reaching than you think.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. That brings us to the end of the first half of this double episode. So like always, make sure you subscribe on your favorite platform. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, wherever you find us, give us a 5-star rating and a review to let us know that you're listening and enjoying.
And you can also follow us on social media. We're at Guides Own on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Make sure you're following us there to keep up to date on new episodes, any podcast news, and the behind the scenes bits.
Mm-hmm. And as we part, we wish you all good guiding.
Good guiding.
Day is done, gone the sun, from the lake, from the hills, from the sky. All is well, safely rest, peace is nigh.